In this project, we will be introduced to a very useful display interface for your electronics projects, a liquid crystal display or LCD. LCDs come in handy if you want to display text or have a menu for your electronics projects. We will be using a standard 1602 or 16 by 2 LCD, and in this project I will show you how to wire it up and interact with it using the Liquid Crystal Display library for Arduino. We will be using the LCD in our online weather station, so it is important that you understand how it works and how to interface with it. Let's get started. Here are the objectives for this lesson. By successfully completing this project, we will have mastered the following items. You will learn the pinout of the 1602 LCD and how to connect it in your circuit. You will also learn how to communicate with the LCD using your Arduino and the Liquid Crystal Display library. And we will be displaying text on our LCD. If you are ready to begin, let's get this project started. Here are the parts we will need: an Arduino Uno, a USB cable, a breadboard, a standard 1602 LCD, a pin header strip with 16 pins where applicable, a 10 kilo ohm potentiometer, a 220 ohm resistor, and connecting wires. Let's quickly discuss the LCD pinout and operation. Our 1602 model can display 16 columns of characters in 2 rows, so it is also referred to as a 16 by 2 LCD. There are 16 pins on the LCD, and this model is very cheap. To make it easier to connect on a breadboard, you may need to solder male header pins into the LCD pinout connections. This is a simple task. If you are not comfortable with soldering, you can also search for LCDs that come with the pins already soldered and attached. Generally, pre-soldered versions are a little bit more expensive, but still very cheap nevertheless. I will put a couple links to very good soldering tutorials in the resources section of this project for those of you who are new to the soldering process. I have included a table with the pinouts to help us out when we are wiring up the circuit, but the circuit diagram will also illustrate this. It is important to note that 4 of the pins for our display are not connected to anything. These are pins 7, 8, 9, and 10. Let's take a look at the circuit diagram for our LCD project. Pin 1 on our LCD is connected to ground. Pin 2 is connected to 5 volts. Pin 3 is connected to the middle pin of our potentiometer, and the potentiometer also has a grounded connection on one external pin, as well as a connection to 5 volts on the other pin. Pin 4 of our LCD is connected to pin 0 on the Arduino. Pin 5 is grounded. Pin 6 is connected to pin 1 on the Arduino, and pins 7, 8, 9, and 10, as we mentioned, are not connected to anything in our circuit. Pin 11 is connected to pin 2 on the Arduino, 12 to pin 3, 13 to pin 4, 14 to pin 5, and pins 15 is connected via a 220 ohm resistor to 5 volts. The last pin, 16, is grounded. And don't forget, we have to connect the ground pin on the Arduino to our ground rail, and the 5 volts pin on the Arduino to the 5 volts rail. That completes the wiring for our circuit. Okay, let's go ahead and wire up our circuit for our LCD demo. So here's the LCD display, and as you'll notice, these are the pins that I soldered in, the male header pins to allow us to easily connect this to the breadboard. This pin at the top here is pin 1. You'll see it labeled to pin 16. As I mentioned, if you're not comfortable soldering, you can probably buy this already pre-soldered, but it just comes a little bit cheaper if you can handle the soldering yourself. Okay, so I'll go ahead and connect this to the breadboard. Pin 1 goes to ground. So here's our pin 1. I'm going to connect that to the ground rail and connect the ground from our Arduino to the ground rail, just to make things a little easier. And while I do that, I'll also connect the 5 volts to the 5 volt rail. Next, pin 2 goes to 5 volts. So here's our pin 2. That's going to go to the 5 volt rail. Pin 3 goes to our potentiometer. So this is our potentiometer that we'll be using. It's a 10K pot. So this is used to control the contrast on the display. We can adjust the contrast. So I'll go ahead and connect this in the circuit. I'll face it outwards. Okay, so pin 3 is going to go to the middle of that potentiometer. So I will make that connection now. The other ends of the potentiometer, one end goes to ground. And the other end goes to 5 volts. Next, for pin 4, that goes to pin 0 on the Arduino. Pin 5 goes to ground. Pin 6 goes to pin 1 on the Arduino. Pin 7, 8, 9, and 10 are not connected, so we continue on with pin 11. So here we go, pin 7, 8, 9, and 10, pin 11 goes to pin 2 on the Arduino. Pin 12 goes to pin 3. Pin 13 goes to pin 4. Pin 14 goes to pin 5. Pin 15 goes to our 220 ohm resistor to 5 volts. So I'll make that connection. Here's pin 15. We're going to put in the 220 ohm resistor. Alright, so our pin 15 goes to the resistor, and the other end of the resistor goes to 5 volts. Connect that to the 5 volt rail. And finally, pin 16 is grounded. Okay, so that completes the wiring for our LCD. Okay, let's go ahead and upload the code to show how our LCD display works. This is a sample program that just prints hello world to the display. So I'll go ahead and upload this. Alright, so there we go. Simple as it is, it shows hello world. And one thing that I wanted to let you know about is this potentiometer. By adjusting it, we could adjust the contrast on the display. So I'll go ahead and just tweak this here. As you can see, I can make it lighter, almost going away, or darker. So that's what that is here for, to tweak. By turning this potentiometer, we're able to adjust the contrast on our LCD. So there you have it. I'd also like to mention that there are several examples for interacting with the LCD. Let me show you those. So if we take a look at from our Arduino, if we go to File Examples and down to Liquid Crystal, here you can see some sample programs that installed with the Arduino, and they help to show you how to do scrolling text, cursors, and so on. So let's go ahead and select on the scroll sample program. One thing I'd like to let you know is that the configuration here in the sample programs is a little different to the configuration we have for Liquid Crystal. So if you look at our program, our Liquid Crystal program, our basic Hello World program, the pinouts are a little different. So to get these to run successfully, just go ahead and copy this, our definition of Liquid Crystal, that object for the pinouts, and I'll go ahead and paste that in, comment out the one that they have, and I'll go ahead and upload this. So this sample should show scrolling text. Alright, so there we go. You're seeing hello world. Let me adjust the contrast here so it will probably show up a little better. Alright, so there you see hello world is scrolling back and forth. And there are several other examples out here, but you could play around with this, and those sample programs show you how to use different functionality on the LCD and get scrolling text and cursors and so forth. So it's a good idea to play with them just to get an idea of, some of the things you can do with the LCD display. Let's take a look at the code for our Hello World LCD program. So some of this code was taken from the samples that are bundled with Arduino, but initially at the beginning of our program we need to include the liquid crystal library. So we do that and include liquidcrystal.h. Then we initialize the library with the numbers of the interface pins. So we create that liquid crystal object, we name it LCD, and we pass in, these are some of the pins that we connected to the Arduino. To get the documentation for this and the order of the variables, at the top of our program there's a little bit of documentation of what those arguments are. And as you can see, we connected the RS pin to pin 0, the enable pin to pin 1, and so forth. So the documentation is there for the pinout. In our setup function, we first set up the LCD number of columns and rows. So we're using a 16 by 2 LCD. So we do LCD begin, passing in 16 for the number of columns and 2 for the number of rows. And we do lcd.print hello world. This is a message we want to show up on the LCD. And finally, in our loop function, we simply do lcd.display. That turns on the display and shows the message we printed out. So that's pretty straightforward. That's all that happens in our loop function. You can also do an lcd.noDisplay. That turns the display off. So if we had uncommented these two lines, essentially we would see hello world blinking. It would be turned off for half a second, turned on, and then turned off for half a second. So that's our LCD basic program. To summarize, in this project you learned how to connect and control a 1602 LCD using the Arduino. You should also have some familiarity with the liquid crystal display library and how to use it to send instructions to your LCD. I have built many projects that use an LCD, so hopefully this knowledge will come in handy for you as well. Let's move on to our next project.